621 here, Big 550, KTRS. Well, would you or wouldn't have you gone into Iraq seems to be a question that the Republican Party is dealing with and grappling with, including the quote-unquote frontrunner, Jeb Bush, to talk all about it. And to get political expert analysis, as always, Trey Harden from ABC News in Washington. Good morning, Trey.
Good morning, McGraw. How are you?
Great. So, and I've heard every bloviator talk about this, and I hear this seems to me a simple answer to all of this. Jeb Bush's problem isn't that he changed his story 4 times; it's that he didn't pick a side and stick with it. Right? He didn't defend what he actually thinks. So now no one knows what he thinks, and it seems like whether we should or we shouldn't is still unsettled, and that there are varying points, all valid.
Yeah, he certainly is stumbling into this candidacy, isn't he? I mean, you could almost argue that he's been out of the game for a while, and he's getting back into it. He's finding it to be a rocky road. I'll tell you another thing too that I think is a little disconcerting if you're in the Bush camp, and that is, he seems incredibly defensive, and almost maybe putting himself above some of the questions that get asked, almost that he's earned the opportunity not to have to answer some of these questions, or to at least do it his way. Very much like Hillary Clinton to a certain degree. I think those are liability. Those can be liabilities for both of them. I mean, you and I have talked many times about how Hillary Clinton has got a likability issue. I don't think she has the women's vote locked up at all. I think there are many women out there that really that don't know how they feel about her, or they feel strongly that she, that she's rough around the edges. Certainly doesn't have the personality of her husband. So I think that we've seen a little bit of that out of Jeb Bush as well. Almost this kind of political royalty arrogance to a certain degree, and I think he's got to be cautious about that.
What's interesting is that I still don't exactly know what he thinks, and even though I know this is the world of you mess up, you flub up, and you'll have to live with it for the rest of your life. There are many people who actually want to know, Jeb Bush, what do you actually think, and what would you have done? And it's a legitimate question, and it's not worthy of a flippant PR response. It's actually worthy of a nuanced answer, one in which he has still yet to give.
Yeah, absolutely, McGraw. And I'll tell you, I think you have to start this conversation with the premise that any association with or defense of the Iraq War or President Obama's foreign policy is a political liability. And again, going back to both Bush and Clinton, I think both of them, to a certain degree, start this campaign or their candidacy with that political liability, in addition to the personality one I just referenced. Because clearly, Jeb Bush, it's going to be almost assumed that he's going to defend his brother until he says otherwise. So to your point, some clarity in his response, or definitive response, I think is crucial for him on this. And then on the Hillary front as well, I mean, does she defend, or does she distance herself from what I personally believe is the most ineffective president from a foreign policy standpoint we've ever had, and one that maybe I think is even in some ways created more uncertainty for the U.S. and the world. So I think they both start off with that political liability, but again, to your specific question, I think Jeb Bush is the lack of clarity. It makes it worse for him every time he talks about it.
Bobby Jindal came out and sort of supported President Bush's and his actions. Lindsey Graham has come out and said so. Rand Paul's taken the other side. It seems like it's an unsettled answer, right? I mean, depending on where you are on the spectrum, is your answer. So, I mean, it isn't like gay marriage where, everyone knows you have to answer it one way.
Right.
This is a much more...
it's nuanced.
Right,
yeah.
It's nuanced, but left, right, center in the party, I don't think there's a correct answer to this.
No, I don't think any of them really want to answer the question, to be quite honest with you. But to your initial statement, voters are going to want to know, and they're at least going to want to know. And the reason they're going to want to know is because clearly it is still a very unsafe and uncertain part of the world that has repercussions that spread far away from the Middle East. And I think if I were advising some of these candidates right now, you don't want to talk about the past, you want to talk about the future. And so you want to talk about the region of the world, Iraq and Syria and ISIS, in terms of the future and recognizing the threat. I think as long as Republicans are talking about the threat and that making it clear that they recognize it, and that if they were elected, they would take certain steps to make sure that the United States is secure and safe, the borders are secure, Homeland Security, and that we're continuing to fight this war on terror, I think that that's a positive message for them. Whereas on the Democrat side for Hillary, we've got a president right now that clearly does not recognize the threat. So she's going to have to convince voters that she actually recognizes it as well. So that's where I think they need to talk about it.
I think Jeb Bush, if you're a Jeb Bush fan, I think you're petrified right now, because I don't necessarily buy, he hasn't been in the game for a while. It's like riding a bike. And here's, this is the big leagues, and he's been, training for this and practicing for this, and to come out the way he's come so flat, I'd be really concerned if I were a Jeb Bush fan.
Well, he's coming. What he's done is he has taken the process for granted, or he has assumed that he's a front runner, a blue chip candidate, and I'm telling you, I've said it before on your show, I don't think he is, because I think he's too much of a wild card on how he's going to be received by Republican primary voters. We don't know that yet. I think we're starting to see that, and he's not helping himself out here. But the Bush fatigue, he needs to introduce himself as a completely different person. And to go into this candidacy kind of assuming that he's going to get a pass on some things, I just don't think is the way to do that. So, I don't. I think his candidacy is a wild card, and I do not think that he is necessarily automatically a front runner going into this.
It's also hard to introduce yourself as somebody else when you look exactly like your brother and your father, and you sound exactly like them.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yep, optics are everything.
Yeah. Trey Harden, have a good week. Thanks for checking in.
You too.
You got it. 628 here, Big 550, KTR.